welcome everybody to MogTalk. It's been quite a while. If you guys are unfamiliar with MogTalk, this is a podcast now that's about Final Fantasy. We'll discuss either Final Fantasy, we might discuss Nosferatu, if you guys have seen that movie recently too. Anything. We are doing kind of a new style to MogTalk, not just focusing just on Final Fantasy 14 in general, but on anything that's worth talking about, I guess, from my perspective. And this kind of comeback episode that we're doing today, I am having something that I think is a very interesting conversation about Final Fantasy XI and a raid that took 10 months to clear it. And to talk about that, I brought on two people who are heavily involved in that whole thing. So let me go ahead and let them introduce themselves. Big, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I'm BigTymber, 11 player, and I do dabble in 14 as well. And I was part of the group that cleared it.
All right. Vice?
Yeah, I'm Vicenarian. I just make Final Fantasy XI content. I'm not a serious 11 player. I just like to try to take some of these accomplishments and make them a little more well-known than they are.
So you're just a content creator. You make content, you don't play the game.
I do play, but it's very, very casual. Very casual, especially compared to like BigTymer's level.
Fair. Yeah, same for me. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I just downloaded the Final Fantasy 14 patch recently. That happened like 4 months ago. Lots
Have you
of stuff
played the
going
11
on.
raid yet?
No, I haven't played the 11 raid. That's horrible.
Okay.
I should have done that for at least like some sort of context research, right? Would have been good. And a lot of people will have offered to help me get through that, so I will probably do that soon. I heard it was good. Did you guys do it?
I did play it. Yeah. There's it's certainly fun for people who have played 11. Certainly back in the day, there's so many throwback nostalgia references that only 11 players would get. So I certainly appreciated it.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just finished Heavensward for the first time not too long ago, so I'm not quite there yet.
Congrats.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. I'm looking forward to going further in that, but scheduling is a little bit tough sometimes.
Oh, I understand completely. Trust me. All right. Well, today the conversation is going to be around Final Fantasy XI, and then the accomplishment Big T and your team did to clear this fight that took again 10 months, which is, I don't know what's the longest a fight has gone on for. I know there's been like some kind of like years base kind of fights out there, but this is a pretty long one. Is this normal for 11? Do fights normally take a while?
I would say no, it's definitely not normal, but it's not completely unheard of. I think you kind of alluded to maybe some of the history of 11. The game does have a history of putting out fights that are highly overtuned, if not outright impossible to beat. I think anyone who is listening who at one point played 11 back in the day, they were probably familiar with the fight that was the boss that was Absolute Virtue, which they actually did copy over, and there's a 14 of that now. But yeah, there's kind of a famous history of Absolute Virtue being one of those kinds of fights that came out and remained unbeaten for a really long period of time. And the only known way to have beaten it back then was basically through an exploit, which almost certainly was not the intended way. And there were a couple of other famous fights. Pandemonium Warden stands out as well as another one. So the game does have a history of it, but I would say, at least in recent memory, it's definitely not the norm that a fight would go this long unbeaten.
Okay. Why did you keep going? It was like a certain point you're like, I gotta get back to life. I don't know why we're even doing this anymore.
That's a great question, and that's a question that we asked ourselves quite a number of times throughout progression. Yeah, throughout progression, certainly those kind of doubts creeped in. There were various times where we had the history or knowledge of the game. In the game's history, they've put out these kinds of fights that are kind of deemed to be impossible until they ultimately nerf it. And that was even some of those fights like Absolute Virtue that came out back in the game's heyday when the game had more than just a skeleton dev crew that it has now. So back then they had more resources to actually properly playtest these things before releasing them. Nowadays, it would be, we'll never know, but because of how few people are working on 11 now, it's hard to imagine that for an hour-long fight that is supposed to be sort of like the top tier, most challenging piece of content, it's hard to imagine that they fully, thoroughly, properly play tested it. So, what's probably more likely is they're just, kind of doing rough back of the napkin math to determine whether or not it's mathematically doable, and then just putting it out to the player base to see if they can clear it. And then if enough time goes by, maybe they'll nerf it if it hasn't been cleared. So that's, probably a safe assumption that they're doing something like that to their playtesting now. And so, with that in mind, knowing that they probably didn't really properly playtest this fight, that was sort of added to the doubts of whether or not this was actually doable. At certain points throughout progression, we really had these come to Jesus moments where we were, sitting down for conversations of, okay, do we feel like we're wasting our time here? Because, I recall back to a couple weeks into progression, we had started to do sort of some of the small DPS optimizations that would be required to push extra damage. And we were kind of starting to feel like we were approaching that point of we've found all of the significant optimizations that we could possibly find, but we were still only at 55-ish% on the boss. So that was certainly a come to Jesus moment that I recall of, should we continue investing time into this, or should we just wait until the inevitable nerf?
Right.
So yeah, to your point, yeah, there were certainly many doubts that crept up while we were going through it.
I mean, and that's
I also
completely
want to.
fair. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I also just wanted to add really quickly. I talked to a lot of people who quit 11 around Abyssia, or maybe Seekers of Adoulin. People who play will recognize those names. There's a really big, sentiment among people who quit 11 quite a ways back then that they don't release any more difficult content because of raising of the level caps or something like that. But there has always been some really, really difficult content that 11 gets. So, at one time it was some of the Omen NMs. For a while it was the Dynamis Divergence NMs. More recently we've had, Odyssey, some of the NMs in Odyssey, and then Ammonon from Swordy. So the game has always had intensely challenging content to go through. I think the last two NMs, the really difficult ones, one took 2.5 months. Big T, you'd remember better than I think that was Bomba. And then one Ammonon, hard mode Ammonon, took about a month to clear. But of course, even those are just a massive step down in terms of difficulty from something like Oathsworn Blade, the Master Trial that they just recently cleared. So the game has always had really, really difficult content, even though it isn't getting as much as it used to,
Right. And that's really interesting to, by the way, you guys chat, we've changed up a decent bit of the format for MogTalk here, and mods now have the ability to just throw stuff on the screen, and I don't have control over it, and I'm not in really a good position to stop a lot of it, so you might see images or other things. Like, I saw an image pop up, and I thought, I pressed the button somewhere, and I messed something up. But you will see that now pop up on the screen. I'm not putting anything on the screen. It's literally our mod union team in control of whatever is showing up. So, just small note. But yeah, going back to the conversation, just about Final Fantasy XI in general. I mean, a lot of people, including myself back in the day, kind of thought that game was going to be just disabled and discontinued, right? And the servers would eventually die, or they would just not do anything anymore. And it's strange to hear about like these. So it was strange to hear about the 10-month raid, but it was also strange to hear about a raid. So
yeah,
what is the state of Final Fantasy XI right now in terms of like content coming out for it, and the community that plays it?
I think the surprise that you have about content still trickling in for 11, I think even 11 players have that same surprise. It was probably the latest occurrence of this was maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, where the dev team had put out some sort of cryptic translated message that the NA community interpreted as the game going into quote-unquote maintenance mode. And the game does have kind of a history of that. Like they've put out statements like that in the past. Seekers of Adeline, which was one of the expansions that came out sometime, I think around 2010, 2011. At that point, they had said this is going to be the last and final expansion and last and final major piece of content for 11. And then we kept getting stuff. And at some point, they said it again with another sort of mini expansion, which was Rhapsodies of Vana'diel. And most recently, like I said, they mentioned it like about a year and a half to 2 years ago. And since then, we've continued to get more and more content. For example, a parallel like to 14, I guess that might make sense, is these master trials, which this fight was in that category, are a kind of content that's somewhat similar to the concept of ultimates in 14, in that they're long duration instance fights, boss fights that are put into the game purely for the sake of adding something super challenging to the game that only rewards a cosmetic item, cosmetic weapon. So in that sense, yeah, very similar to Ultimates in 14, and within about a year and a half span, they put out 3 of those fights, which is a pretty decent pace of content for a game that's supposed to be in maintenance mode.
Yeah, I mean, it's like promise nothing, and everyone's excited when you get something, right? It's
yeah, exactly.
I wonder what that looks like on the back end for Square Enix. They're just like, all right, you guys handle 11, figure something out, and they're like, hey, can I make some stuff? Sure, I guess we're paying you anyways, just go ahead and make stuff. It's weird that they don't really talk about that or try to sell it or try to do anything with it.
Yeah, one really weird thing in particular about 11's development is I speculate the company literally does not dedicate one dime to marketing the game. So the most we understand about the development cycle for 11 content is like these annual, hey, it's a new year posts that are put up on the main website. So like when BigTymber was talking about that cryptic message that sounded like it was in maintenance mode, there was some conflicting messages because they also said that some of the devs were going to work on other stuff. Now, a couple months later, the 14 Alliance raid was announced. So, maybe that makes a little bit more sense. But that having been said, it is really difficult to know what exactly Square is planning for the game, other than the fact that they keep saying they plan on making stuff for it for as long as possible.
I mean, that's really crazy to think about. And back in the day, Final Fantasy XI was, it was a tough game. Like to level up and go through everything, and they made some quality of life changes, I know, to get into it, and so it's not much more accessible than it was before. In my experience, I'm going to be completely honest with you, is I tried to play it how many years ago? I want to say it was about 20 years ago. I tried to play it of the Play Store and Play Online or whatever, and I think it was around when it was starting to come out on PC. I can't remember when that happened. But
yeah, like 2020. I'm sorry, 2003 perhaps.
2003. That sounds about right. Well, actually, it was a little bit past that. Just a little bit past that. I think maybe not 20. Maybe 15 years ago. Maybe a little bit past 15 years. And I just got on there, and the same story I tell everybody. I tried the jump, and I was just like, I'm glued to the floor, and I played WoW before I played 11. Yeah. So, I know WoW came out after 11, but it just felt weird and awkward going back to it.
So one really interesting thing about I guess modern 11, just really quickly about the accessibility of the game, is one of the previous mini expansions, called Rhapsodies of Vana'diel. They added a lot of these quality of life features, and as a response to that, the one that they just finished up, the mini expansion called the Voracious Resurgence, it introduced a lot of things like really long grinds back into the game. So they gave us like a master level system, which takes an absurd number of hours to get to max level now. Not really required for a lot of stuff, but half of the game feels like it's really accessible, really easy to get into. In fact, they're giving away gear left and right, through certain systems. And then like the really cutting edge stuff. I mean, it could take a long time to get to master level 50 or to finish a prime weapon, let's say, one of the ultimate weapons,
So, I mean, the time investment is still rough. Even with all of that, the time investment just seems so exhausting. At some point, I'm gonna have to do it. and get into it and just experience 11 the way that everyone from 14 like just talks about it constantly. It was funny. We did. There was a convention that me and my buddy in chat went to, and one of the most popular panels was one they hosted about talking about Final Fantasy 11 going into Final Fantasy 14, which is kind of strange. I guess like it was a 14 convention, like a little kind of local convention put together, Gateway Fate. It was amazing, by the way. I hope next year it's great too. But like just to see like everybody from 14 go to that panel and put the most interest in that kind of I guess conversation. And so there's a lot of value still there. There's a lot of nostalgia I think people hold for 11, and they want to go back and play it too.
If you're afraid of that time commitment, 11 is in an interesting place right now because there is a lot of like super relevant endgame content that isn't necessarily considered cutting edge. So getting through the story is relatively quick and easy. I probably went through the main story, I like to call it the main story, in probably something like 300 hours. It's pretty comparable to 14. You don't have to do like these year-long grinds just to finish one expansion anymore. Similarly, some of the older Master Trials, if you're interested in experiencing those encounters, you can gear to the level where you go through those without too much challenge. Now, again, if you're wanting to clear something like Oathsworn Blade, then it might take a lot longer. That having been said, there's a lot of stuff that you can get into without just sinking, unreasonable amount of hours into the game if that's not what you're interested in.
And Yoshi P has hinted at in the past at some point maybe some sort of shared sub fee.
Man, that conversation never stops.
I know. Yeah. I know. We're still waiting for that one.
Yeah.
If it happens, 100% I'll jump in, without a doubt. And I'll play it just because it's just that easily accessible at that point.
And in case people don't know, I think it's maybe now at the cadence of twice per year, they have a period where there's like 3 weeks of free login. Where I know a lot of friends from 14 who... they want to scratch that nostalgia itch,
right?
For small periods of time, so they take advantage of like those 3 week windows and come back and scratch the itch and then go back to 14.
Yeah, I mean that's a wonderful idea as well. And eventually I'll get it. I'll let you know. Don't worry, first person I tell. But yeah, I think that the other thing that I kind of want to hit on a little bit while we're talking about 11, I guess, going back to kind of the world race stuff a bit. And I feel like we should have done it earlier, but I kind of want to do it now. Vice, your kind of role in all of this is kind of just watching it, trying to give some sort of spotlight to it and everything else. Can you talk about that a little bit and kind of how you got into it and kind of what you're doing right now with just the 11 side, with the world first?
Yeah, definitely. So I really started because I was wanting to play 11. I went to YouTube, I looked up reviews for like the expansions, and there's practically very, very little content on YouTube about 11. So I thought, I know nothing about it, let me do a blind playthrough of like the main arc, the Rhapsodies of Vana'diel arc as a lot of people call it, and I decided to make some expansion reviews. Through that, I made sure to do a lot of research on all of the different side content each expansion introduced, and then I learned about the Master Trials. By this point, I was already pretty interested in the Ultimates in 14, even though I wasn't playing 14 at the time. I watched some stuff, like some of your coverage even. So when I learned about the Master Trials, I began digging into a little bit of their history, like who was the first to clear, things like that. By the time I finished that review series, they announced a couple more Master Trials, because by that point, some of them were pretty old and pretty power-crept. Well, I started following along what was happening, and I'm sure BigTymber would remember, I noticed that his group was also the first to clear the first Master Trial in this newer batch, Crystal Paradise. As I mentioned over chat, he's like a back-to-back 2-time world first player. Really, really great player. Long story short, I realized, especially going into Oathsworn Blade, that the prog for these fights is just unreal compared to some of the progs in 14. Not to criticize that, again, I love the Ultimates.
Oh, I'm taking offense.
Yeah, but honestly, so what I did going into Oathsworn Blade was I just started reaching out to all of the players that I was aware were trying to get like first. And this community, it's a lot more slower paced than the Ultimates, obviously, because I mean, it's not like you can do 16-hour days for 10 months straight. That having been said, I did get some people both in Japan and here in the US who are willing to kind of, talk to me about what their experiences were with the Master Trials. And the longer I kept up with Oathsworn Blade, the more curious I was getting as to whether it was ever going to be cleared. Months went by. They got to the second to the last phase of the fight. They said that the victory was pretty much in sight, and then a lot of people started dropping out. A lot of people were saying that this fight was impossible. And it made me really curious because a couple months after that, another Master Trial was released, and Square themselves said that it was supposed to be even more difficult than Oathsworn Blade. Well, just a couple weeks ago, I wasn't expecting it at all, but I saw a write-up that BigTymber posted. And again, the strategies that they used to clear Oathsworn Blade was just really, really idiosyncratic compared to most of what you have to do in 11. And BigTymber would be able to tell you a lot more about that. But these fights, they really, really push the limit of what the combat system in 11 can do in ways that most casual players wouldn't even think to try or do, So a lot of what I'm doing is literally just DMing and reaching out to people who I know are working on the fights and tracking progress that way. Nothing too spectacular, but it's pretty entertaining on my front.
That's me, man.
Yeah.
14 has evolved in many different ways with the world race scene and everything. I mean, at the beginning, it of course was just the players posting on Twitter and just saying it, and everybody like, "Oh, cool, a team's cleared," and no one really thought more of it past that. I am curious, Big, kind of what that scene looks like in 11 in general, people trying to clear these first. Is there a lot of teams out there? Are there a lot of teams, or is it just a group, one group just trying really hard?
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to Ultimates in 14 in that, admittedly, it is a small portion of the player base that's even attempting these. I think that portion of the player base is likely even smaller in 11. There definitely are a number of groups out there attempting these when they come out, but there definitely isn't the same kind of race to world first scene where everyone's kind of paying attention and tracking the progress. And nowadays in 14, groups have gotten more and more transparent, and a lot of the groups are willing to even stream it now. And you guys bring on commentators, which is awesome to see. We're definitely not near that level in 11, and realistically probably never will get there. So it's not nearly as transparent, but and the groups aren't really communicating. They're not streaming. Everything is close to the chest. All the strategies are kind of kept secret while you're working at it for competitive reasons. So it's much more akin to what kind of the race to world first used to look like, I would say, in 14, where you didn't really hear a word from the top groups until Kill finally came in, and then you found out via a Twitter post.
Yeah, and all I did was just create a Google form. I just put the names on the Google form.
Sometimes. Yeah, one person organize it.
Yeah. So I mean, complete kudos to Vice trying to just get in there and see what's going on. No, I'm not hosting a race for 10 months. I'm sorry.
And honestly, I will say, like BigTymber said, a lot of these groups play it way closer to the chest than I've seen in 14 even. There's one particular group that I knew beyond any shadow of a doubt was really, really trying hard to clear this first. And they never talked to anyone. In fact, I think if memory serves, Shiraj reached out, the tank who plays with BigTymber, he reached out to this group and they blocked him on Twitter. They just didn't want anyone to know the strategy that they're coming up with. Yeah. So it's, from my experience, I've literally only been able to reach out to maybe 50% of the groups that I know through the grapevine are actually working on it. So it's really, really a lot more of a secretive event, I think, in 11 than it is in 14.
I mean, all you need is people to kind of talk about it and people who want to hear people talk about it. I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, the main reason 14 has any kind of interest in their world race is because people love to see the new content and what happens, and just kind of keep up with it and try to figure out what strategies people came up with and just the excitement of new content without actually having to do it themselves, right? They can kind of just be a spectator in a lot of stuff that's not really accessible to them because maybe not just skill level, but time or whatever else, and they're just a big fan of it. And I don't know, so when we talk about the story aspect of a lot of these fights, are they pretty vital when you're doing the fight? You go through it and you discover a little bit of lore about the game or anything, or is it pretty much just here's a challenge that means nothing?
I would say it's more of the latter. Admittedly, I'm not a lore master by any means, but yeah, there's virtually no text at all that comes up in these encounters. There's not any cutscenes associated with them, so unlike with 14 where you have a lot of cool lore twists that pop up in the ultimates. Yeah, you really don't have that with these fights, unfortunately.
Yeah, and speaking as someone who is a really big fan of Final Fantasy XI lore, most of the times the Master Trials are themed after particular like groups, like powerful people teaming up at some point in the history of the game. So a really good example of that is one of the older Master Trials. It's called Unafraid of the Dark. It has the villain from the very first arc and 3 of his henchmen. In the main story, you never really see those 4 together, but they decided to put them together for one of the Master Trials. In Oathsworn Blade, the one that was recently cleared, in the lore of the expansion, at one point, all, what is it, BigTymber? I think 8 mobs, the King, the 6, Wildskeeper, Naquals, and Theodore. Yeah, all 8 mobs, they were together really, really early in the game's like lore, but they were never together after that at a particular point. And the story kind of hypes up how powerful these people were, these characters were when all 8 were together. But once you actually get into the Master Trial, like BigTymber said, there's no text, there's no lore reveals or anything like that. It's just like these hypothetical fights against these groups of people that you knew were together at one time, essentially.
I mean, it's still neat.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, there are lore reasons for and story-related reasons for, you know, all the ads that the boss spawns throughout this fight. It makes sense that those ads would show up knowing what the story is. It all fits together sort of in the same expansion, but it doesn't really add to the story at all.
It's not like Dragon Song where everyone's just like, save Hachiefant, you know.
Save our boy. Yeah. No, unfortunately, nothing super cool like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I guess with these as well, is this like one of the more publicized? I don't know if that's the right word. Most attention that the Final Fantasy XI raid scene has kind of gotten recently is through this last fight.
I think so, probably. And you can answer that first, BigTymber.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, from my point of view, it certainly has been. I don't recall in recent history any other encounter that got as much attention on this one. I think in big part just because of the amount of time that it took. I mean, if this fight had rolled over in 2 or 3 weeks, there's
rolled
no
over.
There's no shot it would have gotten as much attention. But yeah, when you tell people, oh, this fight took 10 months for the first clear, I think just by virtue of the length of Prague, I think that generates a lot of interest in it.
You know, in reality of that too, we're looking at Final Fantasy XIV having some of the shortest fights that they have released so far, in at least clear time. At least the Savage one that was done recently and the Ultimate one, both the shortest of each mode that has ever happened. And so when you're looking at Final Fantasy XI having those kind of links again, and I think the links help bring attention to the fights in general too, right? It's not always just the content itself, but it could be just kind of part of the spectacle of people getting together and trying to do something like that over a long length of time. And so it may gain the interest of Final Fantasy XIV World Racers, to be honest with you, because there are a lot of 11 old school players out there that do World Race in Final Fantasy XIV that might want to come over and see what that scene looks like. I mean, how many players are you playing with when you're doing a boss?
It's a party of 6 for these Master Trial fights.
Okay, so not too big.
Yep, a little bit less than in 14 with the 8. Yeah, I think that's my hope too. Yeah, if there is interest that's generated by some of these Master Trial fights, yeah, I think sometimes, certainly there's a big overlap in 14 and 11 players. A lot of 14 players either still every once in a while play 11 or played 11 back in the day. But yeah, I think the perception's out there that 11's just not putting out content. But, the more people know that, yeah, it actually is still kicking to some extent, and they are still putting out super challenging content. I agree with you. Yeah, just getting that known and out there, I think could spark interest in some of the 14 player base, giving 11 another shot.
100%, especially. Go ahead.
I was just about to say, here's another thing about, I guess, 11's like super challenging content. It's at the moment largely broken up into 2 types, and I don't really cover the other type because it's a little bit different, let's say. A lot of people will recognize Absolute Virtue, Pandemonium Warden, and that serves as kind of like the other category. So you have Master Trials, which are essentially battlefields or raids, as Final Fantasy XIV calls them. There's another type of super challenge that 11 gets relatively frequently, I'd say, probably. They're essentially just NMs. So way back in the day, Absolute Virtue was like the pinnacle NM of what's called the C Notorious Monster system. Pandemonium Warden was the pinnacle NM of like the Zenny NM system. And still, 11 is getting content in that category. So again, BigTymber would have a lot more experience with this than I do, but the Vengeance plus 25 version of Bomba, which is like the pinnacle NM of Odyssey, it was cleared just, a couple years ago. And Ammonon was even more recent. It's the pinnacle NM of Sortie. So when it comes to like world first achievements in Final Fantasy XI, you kind of have like two categories. One is the raid scene with Master Trials and such, and the other one that's probably more anticipated by the player player base. It's the NM system. It's some of the new NMs that pop up. One of the reasons I find more interest in the Master Trials is largely because they have cosmetic rewards. So I feel like the developers, they literally have no incentive to make the fight clearable. They just make them as insanely difficult as possible. So like even the longest NM to clear, it was like 2.5 months, like I mentioned. The Master Trials, at least this last one and perhaps the one that's still not currently cleared, from an observer's perspective, they're way harder than the challenges in the NM side of the game, let's say. Does that sound about right, BigTymber? Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Yeah, and also a big part of the challenge that comes with these Master Trials is just the duration of the fights. I mean, the NMs that Vice mentioned there are basically 15-minute fights-ish, instance fights. These Master Trials, you have an hour long, and for the first clears, they typically take close to that full duration of time. So with this fight in particular, one of the big puzzle mechanics that really represented sort of the progression wall and pretty much took 8 out of the 10 months to figure out happens very, very deep into the fight. 55 plus minutes into the fight when you first start to get to it, when you're progressing it. So from that standpoint, it's just really expensive from a time and effort point of view to even get there to test ideas to try and figure out that puzzle mechanic.
An hour. Okay, so
yeah,
I can't imagine that's in a very exciting hour. There has to be a lot of kind of standing there waiting for health bars to go down. It's not pure mechanics like the entire time, I'm assuming, right?
It's not like Ultimates in 14 where there's just this barrage of new mechanics that you're seeing at a very fast pace. Some of it's repeat mechanics, but it is kind of intense all the way down in terms of how much DPS that you're trying to output in order to beat the thing on time, and then also all the way down there's pretty significant healing pressure. So it's intense from that standpoint, but it's not as mechanically as intense as like the Ultimates would be.
Okay. I mean, I have to ask, how much, when we're looking at like 10 months and you're spending an hour per pool, do you just like log on for 6 hours a day and say, all right, we're gonna get 6 pulls in today, I guess, and we'll see how it goes?
Yeah, that was definitely the challenge for us. I mean, yeah, on a good pull, where perhaps you just lose by timing out rather than wiping. Yeah, that's an hour of time investment, and then in addition to that, there's some pre-buffs that we were doing with other characters, like outside characters. You can bring buffs into the fight even before you enter the fight, which you have significant incentive to do so, because the DPS check is so tight on this. And so between that and like resetting cooldowns and getting a new pop item, you're basically talking about closer to an hour and 20, hour and 30 per attempt.
Oh, so you don't have hard resets like when you guys die. You have to wait. The cooldown persists.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, there's a whole process in getting another attempt going. So it's probably close to 20, 25 minutes, something in that range.
Jeez.
So yeah, there's some overhead there. And when we were working on that final puzzle mechanic, not every single pull you're getting to that point. It was actually quite challenging to even get to that point in the fight. As far as we knew, I think even to this day, there's maybe one other group that we know of that has even gotten to that point in the fight. So it's challenging to even get there. The first time we got there, it was on a really good pull. Everything was going well execution-wise. We had some good RNG going our way because there are some RNG elements to this fight. And we finally got to that point of spawning that final ad with less than a minute left on the instance timer. The few times that we got to that point after that, we were basically getting to that point once every 5-ish hours. So because of how the mechanic works, you basically only have 30 seconds to test whatever ideas that you want to test. So the big challenge that came with it was you basically had to be willing to invest 5 hours of time and effort, and it's a stressful 5 hours too to be able to get there, in order to have exactly 30 seconds to test something.
I'm guessing when you get to those 30 seconds, you guys are all just like analyzing video review and everything, just trying to like make sense of it, right?
Yeah, because you have such few opportunities to get there. You have to do VOD review afterward and make as much out of the information that you do have available as possible.
I mean, what do you do when someone has to go to the bathroom? You're just like, well, I guess we wipe, or they have poop socks. I mean, those are like the two options, right?
Yeah. True gamers have bedpans next to their DX racers. So. Jeez.
And was I right in hearing that no one else has cleared this fight yet?
Nope.
So far, yeah, not a second kill hasn't happened yet.
And what was the day that you guys killed it again?
December 21st, I think, was the exact date.
Jeez, man.
Or a few weeks back at this point.
Yeah, and I also want to point out, BigTymber is literally one of the only two groups that I've more or less confirmed have actually gotten to Theodore. I've heard some rumors of other groups getting there, but I've never gotten actually any hard evidence.
It's such a pain in the ass to track that stuff, right?
It's really, really difficult, especially when a lot of groups are a little more secretive. Again, that's nothing on them. I mean, this is their hobby.
Yeah,
I'm sure
it's whatever they want to do.
Yeah, exactly. But the fact that literally only two groups in the world even have the capacity to test the mechanics in I call it the last two phases of the fight, like the really big bottleneck in the fight. That means that there probably is still one major mechanic that isn't discovered yet. In fact, BigTymber can give a better explanation, but the method that they had for beating this fight was just so unorthodox, so backwards for most of the game's mechanics that a lot of people are still trying to, I guess, theory craft as to what the final mechanic is that lightens some of the last phases of the fight. So it's really, really something else.
So have you not like enlightened anybody on the mechanics or anything? You're keeping that all kind of to yourself?
No, we've shared it.
Okay.
Yeah, we've shared it. So, yeah, I guess that's part of the surprise why there hasn't been a second kill that's coming yet, because that last mechanic that we keep referring to, which was the final puzzle mechanic of the fight, execution-wise, that mechanic is not that difficult to execute on once you know a winnable strategy for dealing with it, which we have shared publicly at this point. So all the information is there, but the rest of the fight, as we've kind of been alluding to, only one other group having even been able to get to that point, that part of the fight so far. The rest of the fight just has a real hard execution check. But this final mechanic, which basically took us 8 months to progress on, that
8 months of the entire thing was the final mechanic?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so we first got to that point about 2.5 months into progression. And progression up until that point was pretty steady, but once we hit that final mechanic, that was truly the wall. And we didn't work out a solution for it until 8 months later. But once you know of a workable way to deal with it, it's not that hard to execute on. The rest of the fight is far harder execution-wise.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So especially from like an outsider's perspective, I was tracking, and I won't say there was regular progress updates, but I got updates every once in a while about them clearing certain phases. In fact, I'm trying to send kind of a diagram of the different phases of the fight right now, if I can, on my phone. To the group chat. But
oh, if you want to send it to Jet, could put it on the screen too.
Okay, yeah.
And he's in the MogTalk Discord. I don't know if maybe you can message him or put it in a chat for him. He could probably grab it.
Yeah, definitely. I'll try to do that while I talk. But
okay.
Essentially, progress was made from an observer's perspective up until that point, and when that point hit, again, first of all, no other groups could get to that point, and secondarily, like the number one groups, BigTymer's group primarily, I mean, they were literally dead in less than a minute every single time they hit that point. So a lot of people, even people who were trying to fight at that point, when they heard the news, at least from what I could tell, they just claimed that this fight was impossible. Again, because the road to get to that second to the last phase was so monumental, and that last phase, at least mechanically, is so much worse than anything that came before. Of course, BigTymer, his group found a way to get past that, but it was really that phase 8, as I call it, is really a huge bottleneck to a lot of different players.
I mean, do you expect that Square Enix will nerf this fight?
I would be surprised if they do.
Okay.
Just because they don't really have a recent history of going back and nerfing content that has been cleared. We were kind of hopeful once we were like 8 months into the fight. We were hopeful, well, maybe at some point they'll nerf it. Maybe we should stop wasting time and wait for the nerf, and then we'll go get the clear. At some point you would like to think that if the fight remained unbeaten for a year and a half, they might come in and nerf it. But we have other fights that they've put out recently that were beaten. The meta strategy has become one that surely was not the intended way. They're sort of very janky workaround strategies that surely Square Enix didn't intend. And a lot of those fights haven't been beaten in a way that you would think would be the intended way. Square Enix hasn't gone back and nerfed the fights, though. Maybe because they saw that players were capable of beating it, so they didn't see a need to go and nerf it. And now that a clear has happened on this fight, and presumably, in the coming weeks or months, there probably will be more clears, I wouldn't expect them to nerf it. There's a chance, even if it hadn't been beaten for 2 years, they might not go in and nerf it. They have a history of doing that with like Absolute Virtue. It took them forever to do anything about it, having gone unbeaten for a long time. It's very much not like 14, where that dev team is very on top of it. If a Savage Raid tier went unbeaten for more than a week and a half, even, you would assume that very quickly Square Enix would step in and do some sort of nerf to it, right?
Yeah. Jet, you put something on the screen that looks like a timeline, but it's kind of small. I don't know. You could probably figure it out. I don't know, Vice, you want to try to explain it a little bit?
Yeah, so I put this little graphic together. Essentially, if you can get that guy on the far left, if you can get his HP to 0, you win the fight. There's some problems along that way, though. I split it up into 9 phases because that's really the easiest way to put it. Whenever an ad spawns, it's way more difficult to get that guy's HP down. In fact, if you want, BigTymer would give you a far more accurate explanation of what's really going on here.
Yeah, so basically the high-level sequencing in the fight is, you start off with the guy on the left there, so his name is August. Every 10% of August's HP, he spawns a new ad. And it's a random ad that he spawns. These first 6 ads are called Knockable ads, and each of those ads have sort of their own different strategy for dealing with, in terms of buff selections and the damage profile that we're choosing to deal damage to those ads, and our positioning in terms of how we're able to maintain party survivability, etc. Each one has sort of a different strategy for dealing with it. While those ads are out, August, you can't damage August, and he also has a really potent regen, which means that you kind of need to center all your cooldown uses for the ads, because any damage that you're dealing to the ads is effectively doing double duty, in that you're destroying the ads HP more quickly, but then also you're preventing the regen from happening on August, which is quite potent. So you kill each ad, August will pop a move called Daybreak, and that'll start a countdown timer that is dependent on how long it took you to kill that ad. So if it took you 5 minutes to kill the ad that forced him to use Daybreak, then exactly 5 minutes after he uses Daybreak, he will use a move called No Quarter, which is basically a split damage conal move that all 6 party members need to split. And the positioning of it, you have to be a little bit careful about the positioning of it. But so each 10% he spawns one of those ads. Each ad gets stronger, and they have these aura effects to them that also get stronger and more potent. And some of the ads are more annoying than other ads, which adds a layer of RNG to it because the ad order for those first 6 is random. So ideally, you really want the tough ones to come out as early as possible. So there's an element of RNG in just how the ads spawn. And then at 30%, the final ad spawns, and that's Theodore. And he was sort of that final puzzle mechanic that took us 8 months to deal with. He's the final ad. Once you kill him, August restores back up to 30% if he was below 30% HP, and then you sort of have this final victory lap push akin to the final phases of Ultimates.
Okay, that's pretty crazy, man. I mean, I think that's fairly interesting. So, are there some runs that you were talking about a little bit with RNG? Are there some runs that you can do, and if the RNG just plays out, you're like, well, I guess it's over, and you just wipe it? Or is it like every pull is valid?
We viewed every pull as valid because up until our kill pull, we felt like we were still getting kind of practice at dealing with this final mechanic. In hindsight, we didn't end up needing that much practice. As I was saying before, execution-wise, that mechanic is not super difficult to deal with. But we had plenty of pulls that, pretty early on we knew were not likely to be kill pulls just because of, for example, the ad order that we were getting. But we still found value in pushing forward and at least getting some practice on that final Theodore mechanic.
Okay, that's that's the right way to look at it. I mean,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say in Final Fantasy XIV, some of the biggest strategies that they do on these fights is just not do damage to the boss until you've seen everything it can show you, and then start doing damage afterwards and optimize your DPS after you've seen all the mechanics before it does this enrage or kills you. But it doesn't sound like that's something that would work as well on this fight, unless if I'm maybe off a bit on that.
Yeah, not on this particular fight, just because with the hardest part of the fight, or at least the puzzle mechanic that we were trying to figure out, you can't even get to that point without pushing damage in a big way. So yeah, okay. You can't do that sort of thing with this fight.
It's man, it sounds like a complete beast. It sounds extremely interesting. I don't think 14 players could handle it. I'm going to be honest, the typical average 14 player, not the really hardcore 14 players, but the average 14 players would see this and they're like, why did you even make this fight?
Well, to be fair, the average 11 player can't handle it either.
I guess that's fair.
Completely honest here.
I would think the average 11 player is kind of a hardcore 11 player, though, right? Because if you're still playing 11, likely it's because you're really, really into 11. Maybe not skill-wise with like jobs and stuff. I mean, I'm sure there's some sort of casual scene still for players to kind of socialize and everything else.
Yeah, in my personal experience, there are, broadly speaking, two types of 11 players. There are literally the players who've been playing for 23 years, more or less straight. Mm-hmm. And then there are actually a surprising number of new players that kind of filter in every month. We're always getting new players in this game, and sometimes they push through to endgame content. Sometimes they finish a couple of the expansions and they leave. So a lot of those players, in the newer player category, their tolerance for some of like this stuff is really, really low. Myself included, by the way. There's no way I would ever be able to clear this fight. Yeah.
Hey, you know what? I did a 7-month fight in Final Fantasy XIV, but really? It was a 7-month fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's well, I'm not so sure about that. I didn't say it. Let the record show.
Oh.
I think to your point though, 11, while it has gotten many QOL updates over the years, it still very much has a lot of the remnants of an old school JRPG, in that there are plenty of aspects to this game that are still extremely grindy, and you end up kind of questioning your sanity throughout. And this fight was definitely no exception to that.
Yeah. So I guess we talked about it a little bit, but what did you guys have for a schedule on tackling this fight? Was it just whenever people were available, or did you actually have like a coordinated time every single day to meet up, or what did that normally look like?
Didn't have a super strict schedule. I mean, we were certainly going harder at it during those first couple of months, 2.5 months, until we hit the wall. Once we hit the wall, I think our interest and motivation in trying out new things kind of ebbed and flowed. They're definitely, I won't pretend like the 10.5 months it took to clear the fight was, it was definitely not the case where we were, doing pulls every single night.
Not 16 hours a day.
Hours a night. They're not even, I wouldn't even say we were doing 6 hours a night every single night. Certainly within those first couple of months, like I said, we were going harder at it. But once we hit the wall and we kind of started to run out of ideas that we were willing to test on that final mechanic, we started to become more casual with it, because for it to be a 5-hour-ish time investment to test one thing for 30 seconds, the idea that we're trying to test on that poll has to have a certain level of plausibility that everyone agreed would be worth spending 5 hours of their life testing. So once you add that filter to it, the list of ideas that we had shortened substantially, and there were certain points where we were kind of out of ideas. I mean, we did have an endless list of ideas to try, but not an endless list of really plausible ideas. So
like some ideas could have been like jump on 1 foot for 2 times during the middle of the fight and see if it does anything.
Yeah, and honestly, something random like that, we wouldn't put past the 11 dev team. They have added some really random mechanics in fights before. So
give me an example out of my curiosity. I just, what kind of random mechanics seem a little outrageous?
So there's in somewhat recent content, there's called Sortie. There's a boss. They put in a mechanic in one of the bosses in Sortie where I forget the exact number of casts, but you have to cast one specific spell or source of damage on the boss 50 plus times, I believe it is, before you break an effect that it has.
What?
Yeah. So
is there any notes or any hints? Like he says, don't cast this on me too many times or something like that, or
in a way, so it's a darkness based mob, and with 11, elemental affinities and alignments are really important. So being darkness based, you at least know that it's weak to light. That's really the only hint that you would otherwise have.
But why was 50?
Right. Yeah, the number itself is extremely arbitrary. So that's kind of that's not the norm, I will say.
Okay.
I don't mean to bash the end game too much by pointing that out. That's
it's
kind
fine.
of an exception. That was a weird one.
Yeah.
But when you bear that in mind, that the current dev team is putting in mechanics like that, and then you're thinking about how to solve this mechanic, and you have that in the back of your mind, you realize, in theory, it could be almost anything. It could almost be anything, but for it to cost us 5 hours each time to test all these ideas, you can't go down that path of trying all these random crazy ideas. The idea has to really hold water for it to be worth testing.
Yeah, and to add to that, in fact, I might have sent you some pictures. I was talking to Shirash again, plays BigTymber a little bit. He was talking about what he thinks might be the intended strategy for that mechanic that BigTymber was talking about, just really stopped all progress. And there seems like there are some things that you might be able to do earlier in the fight to avoid that really, really big mechanic and avoid having to do all of the crazy things that BigTymer's group has done. That having been said, there are so few people who can even make it to that phase that just not a lot of testing is being done on it. So BigTymer's strategy, it's obviously one that, from what I understand, a lot of groups are trying to employ once they get to that phase, but there's still a lot of exploration as far as other ways that you might be able to bypass that. In fact, I sent you some pictures of like these weird animations for one of the mobs. That's kind of what those pictures were about.
Oh, okay.
And furthermore, this is partially a question to you too, BigTymer. In 11, unlike 14, not every party comp will clear a fight. In fact, it feels a lot more like there are a tiny subset of party comps that certain encounters are designed for. So a really big part for some groups in clearing harder content, while it might not be doing pulls, it is gearing other jobs that they wouldn't usually have geared, or grinding towards weapons that they don't already have. So again, not all prog time is specifically in the encounter, but maybe you can count grinding for certain weapons that you don't already have prog time. And this is also, like I said, a question to you, BigTymer. How much of the time that you guys spend out of the fight was working towards either leveling certain jobs or grinding for gear that you might use in the Master Trial?
I would say zero, because the group. Your point's a good one, but yeah, the group of players that we play with, we're kind of no-lifers at this game, and so we basically already had all of the relevant legendary weapons and all of the job availabilities that we needed for testing the ideas that we wanted to try out.
Okay.
It's the party composition point I think is a good one, and it definitely differs 11 from 14 in that, with 14, I know that there are, when it comes to your party composition, I know that, certain DPS combinations and healers and tanks perform a little bit better damage-wise than others. But compared to 11, the gap between the most optimal party comp and the worst party comp is very, very small. In 11, the jobs are not balanced nearly as well as they are in 14. And so much of the content in 11 is situational. All the jobs have uses, but in the right circumstance, one DPS job in 11 might perform 75 to 100% better than another DPS job in that same situation. But in a different situation, the other DPS job would outperform the first one. So because of how situational things are and how situationally different jobs perform, a big part of the ways in which you find extra damage in these encounters is your job selections as you're filling out the party compositions.
Right.
And then in addition to that, 11 also has a sub job system, which kind of adds another degree of freedom to that decision making, which is basically it lets you gain access to whatever sub job of your choosing. You gain access to the spells and abilities of that job up until half of your main jobs level. So the equivalent in 14 would be if 14 had a sub job system, you could run Paladin sub White Mage.
It sort of had one. not entirely, but like at the beginning it was, hey, you needed to level up your Paladin in order to be able to provoke or taunt, right?
Yes.
On other tank jobs. They got rid of a lot of that stuff.
Yes.
Went away, but
yep, I remember that from 1.0.
Yeah.
Similar to that. So that, your sub job selection as well dictates a lot of the ways in which you're dealing with the mechanics. So a lot of the decision making is kind of tailored around the party composition, and that's a good source of tweaking the party composition to get more aggressive and less safe on the healing front. There's a lot of degrees of freedom that you have to kind of creatively play with that to push more damage in 11.
Vice,
yeah, and to add to that, yeah, definitely to add to that, so the minimum involvement that I do have, or rather the minimal involvement I do have in 14, there seems to be two kind of contradictory pushes, yet no one really knows they're contradictory. One is a lot of people are wanting more complexity in the job system. They're tired of this repeated cycle between expansions and even patches. The other group of people really, really want better job balancing. There's a lot of drama about Pictomancer outperforming a lot of other jobs. Final Fantasy XI is literally at the opposite end of the spectrum. The job complexity is just enormous. One Dark Knight, for instance, if you have a Dark Knight that's really, really well geared, same sub job, same armor pieces, but you give him one prime weapon, whereas the other one only has one of the older weapons, the job plays completely different. You know, one weapon can completely change the way a job functions in 11. Similarly, changing your sub job can change things incredibly. So 11 has a ton of complexity. Similarly, 11 has very little job balancing if you think about it. Now, there are some debates as to how well 11 is actually balanced. People are always finding ways to really push metas for like underperforming jobs that not a lot of people realize. So there's a lot of unexplored territory in 11's job system. But if you're wanting to tackle master trials, there are a certain set of jobs that you know you'll be using, you know. So I'm not saying they could add complexity to 14's job system. It would break the balancing. That having been said, it's much more likely that they break the balancing anyway, you know, if they add that complexity. Again, I'm not really sure which I prefer. I'm not even saying one's better than the other. That having been said, it is important to remember if you request one change in the job system of 14, that comes with a bunch of other changes that you might not realize, you know.
And there's the conversation never stops when it comes to job balance and it being homogenized versus complex, and you can make arguments in both directions. I'm an old man, and I like the nonsense, crazy BS of complexity and trying to figure it out and feeling like I have a choice and feeling like I made a decision that makes sense and I'm creative with what I did, even though I could probably go look up what is the current best and do what most people are doing, right? So there's like a whole level of that, and it also, I don't know how hard it is to level up jobs in Final Fantasy XI, but I mean, like when you're getting to the point of I leveled up this job and you get to the end content and they're like, oh, you can't do this because your job sucks. And you don't know that as a new player going in. I mean, you can do research, but it's not something that you want to throw on to a new player base. It's an unwelcoming kind of situation. But that being said, if it's pretty easy to level up another job, then that's kind of the point of the game, is to play multiple different jobs and be able to experience different things and play whatever is the best for the situation, which is always my argument when we come into Final Fantasy XIV in that discussion, is that you can level every single job. If there's an easier way besides just giving Square Enix money to level those jobs, then I think it would be very valid to let these jobs be more complex in general and let some just be bad, right? It's okay for them to be bad sometimes and other ones to be good. Let the players be able to be like, I'm a range player. Well, what good range job should I play for this content because it works out? And that's fun to me. That's not fun to everybody, and it's probably not the most savvy business method to get more money for your game. You want to make it kind of easy and people can kind of get in and do what they want to do and have fun with it, but you also want to satisfy that, like, the people who stay around and keep paying that sub because they want harder content, and it draws in people. And that's why I love the world race, right? Here's the one of the big things about the world race in Final Fantasy XIV is that it is a stage for marketing the game as well. People see it and there's excitement for it, and there's a lot of people watching it, excited to see what happens next, and I feel like that brings in more players, and so having that content's pretty important for them to make money. And so I'm hoping maybe even 11 can kind of do the same scenarios, but they probably don't have a marketing team.
Yeah, so, that's right.
Or their Square Enix marketing team has not been assigned to Final Fantasy XI. They have been assigned to other things. But I mean, that could be a different draw for 11. I don't know. I doubt they'd ever do like classic servers for 11 or anything like that, like restart servers or anything of that nature. Yeah,
I really, really doubt it. What do you think, BigTymber?
The idea has been brought up. I know that Square Enix is aware that players have asked for this. In fact, they just did a recent survey of it was a month and a half ago, where they were basically polling players to see what kind of new content people wanted. And as they were sharing some of the results of that feedback, they had noticed that they had shared that in a lot of the written forms that players could fill out that were with open-ended questions. A lot of players had apparently asked for private servers, so I know that they know that there's a demand for it. There's certainly as I understand it, a somewhat active private server scene that is intended to like replicate the old days.
Of course, there's private
but-
servers for every MMO.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a demand for it. But I'm with you. I would be surprised if Square Enix ever did something like that.
Yeah, one complicated thing about the conversation of private servers is the vast majority of people that I've personally talked to, which I've talked to a lot of people in the 11 community. The people who really want private servers, they know almost nothing about endgame. So one reoccurring thing that I hear is like relic weapons or mythic weapons are no longer relevant to modern endgame, just using some 11 slang. And that couldn't be further from the truth, you know. A lot of them say that there's no more difficult content in 11. Well, here you have a 10-month
Right.
master trial, you know. Some people say that there's no more grind. They just want a game that they can get in with their friends and grind away for thousands of hours. Just have something to do with friends. Quite literally, the master levels take way longer to max out than even like the game back in the old days. The biggest difference is it's really easy to take a level 1 job and level it to 99 and begin kind of just like dipping your toe in the cutting edge. Now, getting to the limit of cutting edge is really a monumental task, but it's relatively easy, again, from 1 to 99 to get there, you know. So I would argue that if Square literally just put in $10 a year of marketing into 11, a lot of people who previously thought there was nothing in 11 for them would realize, oh, you know, maybe this is a game that I'd be interested in. So that's an impression that I have. The desire for classic servers comes from literally zero marketing. In fact, there are periodic, like, official streams about them talking about what they're planning on doing with the game. They never even translate that to English, nor do they publish that in any English channels. So it's like weirdos like me who follow the Japanese versions of all of the sites who find these live streams, and I'm Google translating everything to make sure that people know, you know, it's just, they really do not do anything to show people what modern 11 is like, you know, so it's
Fair.
really it's a bizarre situation when it comes to classic servers anyway.
Yeah.
To voice this point, yeah, I guess to answer your question about leveling, yeah, very easy to get to the max level, but there is a master level system, as Vice mentioned, which, as far as I'm aware, there's not really an equivalent on the 14 side, but people that played 11 back in the day would probably remember the merit point system. It's kind of akin to that. It's a way in which you continue grinding out EXP that strengthens your character, but not through direct level increases.
Okay.
And that system that they somewhat recently added in the past few years is extremely grindy.
So I mean, you can't really have easily multiple different jobs, or different characters with different jobs and everything. So if one was bad, it would be very difficult to get another one unless you already leveled it up in the past, right? Or like geared it up.
Yeah, not easily. To get to the max level and the master level system, it's absurd. How much EXP and grinding that requires. It's absolutely absurd.
So I would say, you know, in the argument of like job complexity and keeping things homogenized, that would be the only caveat, is to make that easier. And so if you wanted to make the 11 system great, all you would have to do is just kind of, if you've already leveled up one, give some way to access other jobs if you want to put out these complex jobs and these complex fights and everything. And that's a barrier. That's a pretty huge barrier.
Yeah.
I think you're spot on with that. I think that's a big barrier into getting into super challenging content for someone new or returning to the game, is with 14, because of how well the jobs are balanced, any job you decide to pick as your first job, you can bring into basically any content in the game, and no one's going to turn you down simply because of the job that you selected. But because of how unbalanced 11 is, depending on the fight that you're trying to do, the job that you decided to level, it might not just be doable. Nobody would want you on that job depending on the fight. And that also means that to kind of be at the cutting edge and push for these world first clears, you do have a big part of it is having a wide range of job availabilities among the players that you play with. And because of how grindy that master level system is, to have a number of jobs leveled up to the point in that master level system where you'd be capable of tackling this content, that is a massive, massive time investment to have good job availabilities and job selections.
Yeah, I mean, that's that makes it kind of sad for getting as many people for going for like a world race or a scene over there for 11, because it's not very accessible. 14's world race is super accessible. All you need to do is level up a character and the gear comes out with the patch, right? You don't you don't have to like grind it out or farm it up. You just get whatever the crafted gear is and just run with it.
And to some defense of 11, it is very, very inaccessible, don't get me wrong. But there's also a lot of debate as to how well the meta of other jobs are explored. Again, I don't necessarily put a lot of credence in all of these ideas, but like, for instance, one player recently developed a meta for Summoner that works really, really well for certain endgame content. Everyone, literally just a couple months ago, was telling him that, you know, he was not exactly on point when it comes to...
saying he was an idiit. You could just say that. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
But like when you actually put up your numbers, you know, it doesn't necessarily matter what job you're using as long as you're performing well. Here's kind of the rub. The fact of the matter is the only players who are really going to push job metas or revolutionize jobs are players who understand the system pretty well. That having been said, I've known probably 3 or 4 players, and literally their passion in the game is to take certain metas of jobs and push them way more than anyone else did. There was one player I know, and he eventually quit at some point, but he was gearing a white mage to be like a physical damage dealer, and he was putting out some impressive numbers. Now, it's not quite anything to like cutting edge quality. That having been said, you know, there's still some unexplored territory when it comes to the meta of certain jobs. But yeah, I mean it is very
exciting as a player, right? Getting into MMOs, that's something that we've kind of lost a lot. And I'm sure if 11 ever exploded and had a huge player base, a lot of that stuff would get kind of, you know, figured out for the most part. But I mean, having unexplored territory and is super appealing for a lot of old school MMO players. But unfortunately, we're not the market, right? We're not.
Yeah.
we're not the exact.
We're not the norm.
Yeah. People that they're looking for. But
It is interesting to see players take a certain job and do things with that job that most people say is impossible, though. It's always entertaining to me as a new player. What's your perspective on that, BigTymber? Again, for me, as someone who's super casual, any progress for any job is exciting. But to you, as someone who understands kind of the ins and outs of the cutting edge of endgame, what do you think when you see some random job like either go through sortie really well or do numbers? Oh, that's the leveling chart. It's kind of broken into 3 phases. Yeah. Anyway, BigTymber, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's I think a lot of these ideas are kind of known and out there. A lot of times when these things come up, it's kind of just a realization of people falling slave to the meta at times and thinking that, you know, there's only certain jobs or certain compositions of jobs that are capable of taking on a certain fight, and people kind of fall into that trap and become meta slaves. And then, you know, when someone posts that they cleared a certain fight with kind of an unorthodox setup with jobs that people didn't view as meta as some of the other jobs, I think it surprises the people that are the meta slaves, but at the same time, you know, like I was saying, I think in the right circumstance, I think every single job in 11 has really good uses. It's just a matter of knowing how to appropriately apply and get the most value out of the jobs.
And I mean, it also comes down to like, is it worth trying to figure out, you know, a new meta or use something that's already established that could knock it out? I mean, The only time you have to figure it out is when you can't do it with what's known as the best of the meta, right? And so it sounds like a really interesting scene in just world in general. And we're talking about 11's kind of race scene and going through new content and everything. And I know that another thing that I've seen, I don't know if this happens in 11 or not, is if like a team gets first, a lot of other teams may clear it and just never say anything. Does that happen?
Yeah. At least from my perspective, it's tough to say because like this fight is so monumental that if someone did clear it, they would very, very likely wind up sharing. I mean, BigTymer's group is literally, they were the only ones who were putting regular updates like out in the public. And a lot of people were theory crafting, but very, very few people were actually trying. There are several groups in Japan who every once in a while just kind of out of the woodwork will post a tweet saying, man, this fight feels impossible. It's like, oh, well, no one knew you were still trying that fight, So I have a suspicion that anyone who's able to actually clear just this insane encounter will very likely post. Furthermore, I'm curious to see what's going on right now with a lot of the people who are trying Oathsworn Blade, because there's still one master trial that hasn't been cleared yet. It's Wing of War, which is like, according to Square, was the hardest in the batch. Of course, like BigTymer said, we're not really sure how well they play test these fights, so maybe it'll be harder, maybe it'll be easier, but I hear through the grapevine that a lot of the players who were working on Oathsworn Blade have kind of given up on that encounter and now are trying on this newer master trial, Wing of War. So we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see.
Big, are you working on that?
We are. Yeah, we're back to it. We took a break from the Oathsworn Blade Master Trial when Wings of War came out back in May, and we progressed on that for probably 2 or 3 weeks before kind of putting that one down and going back to testing out the remaining ideas on Oathsworn Blade. But yeah, now that we cleared Oathsworn Blade, we're going to go back to it. And yeah, as Vice said, that one also remains unbeaten, and who knows, we'll see. I mean, that one at this point is now what, 7 months unbeaten.
Yeah,
so fairly
it's
comparable at this point, right?
It's very possible this one lasts longer than the one that we had just cleared.
Well, I mean, like, part of the delay is clearing the other fights that weren't able to clear, right? So it's like just extra content out there that you haven't actually messed with, and that's insane to me. I'm going to be honest with you, to have like multiple fights out there that haven't been cleared at the exact same time, that are accessible like that. So it's a world I've just never really thought of or dove too much into. So I appreciate the enlightenment, I think
put the spotlight on this. Yeah, I was just about to say I appreciate the spotlight on this. One thing I would really, really love to see is kind of like a new wave of 11 players who are wanting to get into endgame. That hasn't happened in a long time. Even back during COVID, when there was a big wave of 11 players, some of them were either going to private servers, or a lot of them were just there for the story and a little bit of the the ambience, let's say. I think it'd be awesome to see just a new wave of people trying to kind of bring their strategies and their knowledge into the systems of 11 and really see how they push the meta. So of course this might not happen with Wing of War, but you never know, if it gets publicized enough, perhaps by the time the next master trial comes out, we'll have some new faces. So we'll see.
Well, all you need is a really big streamer to come over and get 20,000 people watching them play it. Then you'll have a little burst, right? And also, maybe see, and this is just my opinion. I don't want to speak for the Final Fantasy XIV community, but I do think this expansion for Final Fantasy XIV is kind of a downturn in the quality overall. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff about it, but it feels noticeable. And I think a lot of players are feeling that too. And I'm hoping that there's a resurgence at some point with 14 too, but with this kind of like downward motion here, it could easily swerve into some extra attention over to 11 just because there's a good amount of crossover there. And so I do know some streamers were playing and going over to 11 to test it out. And I mean, they've been doing that forever, though. It's nothing new, but none of them have like 20 or 200,000 people watching them. So it's a little different scenario than what Final Fantasy XIV experienced back in Shadowbringers, right?
I think the closest we've gotten to that is at one point, I think at the start of COVID, Ninja, big streamer Ninja, he was playing 11, but on private servers only.
Oh, was he?
So that was kind of the closest resurgence that we got to something like that.
Yeah. I mean, if they announce some really neat, cool stuff with, I mean, I don't know what Square Enix is thinking. I've worked with Square Enix multiple times in the past. I have no clue what they're thinking when it comes to their business decisions and what they're aiming for. It seems like it can be kind of all over the place sometimes. But I do think there's value.
Like BigTymber mentioned, they recently put out a survey, and a lot of people, a surprising number of people, wound up responding to that survey. They put out a New Year's message saying that they're kind of revamping a lot of older content, and they have plans for the game moving forward. It's exciting to think that the game has still quite a bit in the pipeline, but also, I mean, the game was said to be shutting down, what, 3 times at this point? I mean, we've had Seekers of Adoulin, Rhapsodies of Vana'diel, and finally, most recently, Voracious Resurgence. They're like, yep, this is it. We're putting this game down for good. And then, you know, a resurgence of players comes around, and Square's like, well, maybe we ought to toss them a bone or two. So it's tough to know what's in the future for 11.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the coding looks like for it and how difficult it is to, you know, make a lot of these encounters, but I assume a lot of it's well figured out. And if they have experience, I mean, I don't know. If they have experienced 11 developers over there, it's like, I just have decades of experience making fights. I can just pump these out and I can be happy with life doing this. It's just what I like doing. Then why not pay the guy and just keep him on board to see if you can keep the subscriptions going for 11, especially with them split still, right?
Yeah, and what they've been doing recently, which you know is probably smart at this point in the game's life, which is most of the new content that they've put out in the past few years has basically been just copying over assets, reskinning them, recoloring the assets, just reusing old bosses, old battlefield zones, that sort of thing. And the roadmap that we have for 2025, I think in a lot of people's views, there's more content that they have planned for 2025 than we were thinking for a game in maintenance mode. And one of the big pieces of that is, as Vice mentioned, one of the old events called Limbus that some people might recognize and see. They are planning on revamping that content and making it eye level.
I do know that. Go ahead.
I was just about to say, with Limbus, there's a possibility for at least 2 new really, really crazy NMs. So as far as world bursts go, I'm not sure how fast that those will go, but we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that you really need to do to pull in like players from 14's community and everything else is be like really big in the story stuff. And I did hear 11 has a fairly intense story overall that a lot of people do enjoy diving into. And I guess
I've done a lot of videos on 11 story. I think it's incredible. I think it's one of the best stories in the series. That having been said, it's all text-based, and just by virtue of it being text-based, there's going to be a higher percentage of players who just skip through it as soon as they hit the cutscenes, you know? If you take the time to read through the cutscenes, especially the lore, 11 is just a really, really incredible story.
I mean,
like the story, there's 23 years worth of story to go off of. So if you're into Final Fantasy lore and story content, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of hours there for you.
Yep, a ton of story content.
I mean, I might make. No, I'm not gonna say it. I can't say that I'm gonna play Final Fantasy 11 because it really becomes a thing that I'm attached to and a dedication that I have to do. So I'll stand back, but I do have interest. You guys are definitely, revving up my interest in it because I think it would be fun to just kind of sit down and kind of go through a little bit of a story every once in a while, and just like even if it's just similar to reading an interactive book, sort of, right? Yeah. Because I don't think the experience of going through the story is difficult. Right? It's
in fact it's abysmally easy. I think that one thing that they might want to consider is at least making the missions a little bit more engaging, because if you just power up to max level and go through the stories, a pretty big chunk of that stuff is really, really easy. And also there's a little bit of a roadblock too when it comes to the story. In 14 they call it the Realm Reborn problem, right? In 11, it's pretty much the entire base game in the first expansion. By that point in the game's history, they didn't really get like the cutscene technology and the techniques down. By the second expansion, that's when the story gets really good. And then the third expansion, in my opinion, it really polishes up like the storytelling techniques. And from then on, I mean, it's just some of the best story in the series, again, for me personally.
Yeah. So real quick, chat, if you guys have some questions, go ahead and ask them. I'll start paying attention a little bit more to it. Feel free to ask some questions here. But I mean, just, it's interesting just to think about what the game entails and that there is a plan. There's a roadmap for 2025. That's something I expected to hear, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. It's just this game is one of the original MMOs, man.
We were surprised to see it too. At some point, at some day in the future, I expect there might be whether it be in 26 or 27, maybe the roadmap stopped coming, but they have over the past 3 or 4 years, they've been pretty good about, once the new year rolls around, giving us a content roadmap. They don't always stick to it, but at least they share what they're thinking in terms of plans and the future, and to know what to expect, because I think that's helpful in, people deciding whether or not they want to continue to invest time in the game.
Yeah. Okay, Jet, if you're going to throw images on there, just make it full screen. Just pop it all over. I don't care. You can block us for a moment while we look at it and we can talk about it. Because I can't see shit with that, Jet.
Yeah, these are responses to the survey that they recently put out. They got a bunch of data about how players are feeling about the game. Yeah, so one thing that, again, I find interesting about 11 is the fact that so few people even know about the new content coming out. I feel like one of 11's biggest problems really is just the utter lack of marketing. It's really insane being a content creator looking at just how little marketing comes out. In fact, I mean, recently, just a couple days ago, they put out a new raid. They're called Battlefields in 11. And the number of people who were surprised by this new raid just really blew me away, and they announced it at least a month ago. So it's just the lack of marketing. If they are going to be doing a lot more content moving forward in the future, they really need to look at how they're going to be marketing that stuff, because it's just crazy.
Okay. It looks like there's a lot of people who play daily and for like 4 hours more a day. Still, like the majority is reporting that. I mean, of course, I assume the people who are submitting responses are also active players, right? People who are going to be kind of in that, so it kind of makes sense a little bit.
There was a surprising number of inactive players who wound up responding to this, and I don't know if it's just 11. Maybe World of Warcraft has the same phenomenon, but the amount of people who are active in the forums that do not touch 11 and haven't in years is really surprising. And BigTymber will know exactly who I'm talking about. There's at least one guy in the forum who's literally just posting multiple times a day, and he hasn't logged in like 10 years. So it's really, really surprising kind of seeing how many players who don't play the game anymore still keep up with it. So, it's exciting to see how many people did respond, even if a lot of those might be inactive to some degree.
Yeah. And Jet, I'm going to give you advice. If it's too small for it, throw it in Photoshop, increase it there, then throw it in there if it's stuff on the stream element side. There you go. I'm going to ask a question because I'm going to forget if I don't ask it now. M asked this earlier. Is there space to make more community for the in-game 11 content, like a Discord server or streaming when it gets closer to a clear? Like, do you think that we'll ever see that kind of stuff where people are going to be making it way more public with the world race, where people are streaming at the very end? Or, because you can't do 10 months of stream. I mean, you could if you really want to, but ideally in the state of the race at 11, it's not one of those things where you're transparent, because that gives away a lot of stuff. Even though you've been transparent after clearing it, people still haven't cleared it. So there is an argument a little bit there. But like maybe towards the end of it, showing that on a stream, or making a Discord server to kind of get the community together for the world race.
I'd personally love to see something like that. Certainly, if there was enough demand for it, I'm sure something like that could happen. Of course, at this point, the game being 23 years old, it's hard to generate up enough interest to have some of that make sense. And yeah, to your point, a lot of the groups that are pushing for these first clears do keep a lot of this kind of close to the chest, because some of the mechanics are kind of puzzle related in terms of how we're dealing with them. So to stream it, 14 I know went through the same roadblock in sort of this transition between.
It's not gone.
Right. Yeah, it's very similar in that regard. So yeah, maybe if enough momentum builds up behind it and there's enough demand for it, that would be really cool to see. But yeah, that's at least where it's at now. Okay. Sorry, I think I cut you off, Ice.
No, you're good. And to that point, that's to the best of my ability, that's what I'm trying to do. It's not really effective because I'm busy with my own job and responsibilities. But I try to keep people somewhat updated on like my YouTube channel as far as what's going on with the cutting edge stuff. And I just recently started a Twitter account. It's more so used to talk to Japanese players.
Skip it.
Yeah. Well, see, a lot of Japanese players are on Twitter though, which is
Still,
literally
yeah. I mean,
the
that's the
only
reason.
Yeah.
100%. That's why Twitter exists a lot in the Final Fantasy 14 community too. It's because people want to connect with Japanese players, and that was the best way to do it. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, that's pretty much all I had to say. I'm trying to find some way of making sure that there's a hub of like updates and things going on with Endgame, but a lot of people who are actively playing it, again, like BigTymber said, they're not all that interested in sharing every bit of progress they have, you know. So there's a lot more demand for people interested in this stuff than there is supply, I would say.
Yeah. You had a ping for will we ever get 75 official servers? What does that mean?
It's like the classic server from the golden era. Level 75 was the cap back then. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. I don't personally think so, but you know, who knows? Really, who knows? Because they won't tell us. Square won't tell us.
Yeah. Thought 11 was done. Yeah, no, not yet. Let's see. Okay, that's good for questions, I think. I don't know. Just keep at if you guys have more as we're wrapping up, because we are getting closer to the end. You guys haven't been on the podcast before. Usually we go like 2 hours. I mean, there's not like a time limit, all right? I've done 6-hour straight shows. I've done marathon shows where I've done 13 shows in a row, but I try to keep it a 2 hour for a normal show now because I like going to the bathroom, being able to do other things.
Yeah. If you're watching this and you're interested in a more complex endgame, I'm not one to say that 11 or 14 is better than the other, but if you want a change of pace, definitely try 11's endgame. It has a lot to offer that 14 might not. Yeah. Vice versa is the same, but you know, definitely.
I mean, there is a lot of demand for the complexity. Yeah. Go ahead, Vice. Sorry.
What about you? When are you jumping into 11's endgame?
I said no hard commitments. I can't do it. I can't say it. You know,
you gotta try out the 14 race first, or the raid, the Alliance raid, and see if you like it.
Yeah, I need to go check. I think I'll like it. I think that there's, you know, I'm as much as maybe people think I'm not. I am someone who does enjoy the story overall when it comes to Final Fantasy 14 and just stories in general. I'll get teary-eyed and I'll cry at certain moments and certain things and everything. I'm one of those people. I just joke around a lot too, because I realize it's just a story. You know, once I said, you know, maybe no, I didn't even say it directly. I put up a post and I was like, who's gonna die in this next expansion? Which of the Scions are gonna die? And then someone in that post said Thancred, and then someone said, of course this asshole posted a question like this, and they blocked me. It's like I can't be that attached to it, but I could be in the moment. I can enjoy stories and I can understand what they are, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would definitely probably enjoy the 11 story, just because, you know, Final Fantasy type storytelling usually works out pretty well. Again, I have criticisms on the most recent expansion for 14, and you know how their storytelling went was kind of odd, especially gameplay wise and everything, but I think 11 would be something, from what I've heard from my wonderful friends, is that I would enjoy 11's story.
Its structure is really different from 14. So when you play through 11, each expansion kind of serves as its own standalone story. And in the first mini expansion / 6th expansion, it ties everything together, so it brings everyone back in like an Avengers-style expansion. And also the lore that it drops on you is really, really great. So if you pay attention to the lore and you kind of know where the characters are, and if you play the stories kind of in order, more or less, it's incredible. One complicated thing about 11's story, too, though, is you can play all of the expansions in practically any order you want. So sometimes certain people will go through a story, and then they'll go through an earlier story where it explains certain lore that they were able to put together in a future expansion. And they're like, well, why am I going through this again? So, you know, as far as 11 doesn't really care too much about how well the players follow in the end game, there is a tiny bit of that in the storytelling. But like I say, there are plenty of guides online if you want to play through it kind of in the best experience possible. Many players put you know, those resources together if you're interested.
Yeah. M and Chaz put together a lot of resources for new players as well. Just to get an account was a whole guide.
Yeah. The only encounter in Final Fantasy XI that's harder than Oathsworn Blade is the play online encounter.
Yeah.
Just getting an account set up. It's funny because some people talk about how bad it is for 14. And as someone who's experienced both, if you think 14 is bad, man, you've seen nothing yet.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy. If you can even get an account on 11, the early game's pretty easy, but getting it set up feels almost like an ultimate raid in and of its own.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
it used to be like really bad, where people couldn't actually get subscribed to the game because of issues with 14 and how they set up a lot of stuff. But I know 11 has a lot of similar things, if not worse. I mean, you had to buy Krista stuff like points and then use that for your subscription too, and do some weird janky stuff, which is a little bit abnormal for most modern day gamers.
Yeah, they have since streamlined that process to make it easier, and they also updated the downloader so it doesn't take 24 hours or whatever it used to take to just download all the files for it.
Yeah.
So it's been streamlined, but yeah, in many ways it is still the biggest and perhaps the hardest raid boss in the game is just starting it up.
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Sometimes I meet players who say they're able to get through it without any guides. I'm just blown away. There was no way I was going to do that.
One way there, you know what? Maybe that should be like the first trial I have with the game. Is can I sign up without looking at anything to tell me how to sign up?
Yeah, Final Fantasy XI is the only game I know of where end game is before the actual game, so it's really an interesting experience.
Okay, well the mods decided to put a chat question on here on the stream. What way should a 3 MMO go in your opinion? Are you meaning Final Fantasy 3 or the third Final Fantasy MMO that they would make? So I am curious about a little bit of clarification on that, but I guess I'll just ask it both ways. In what way would a third MMO go? Like, if they're going to do a third MMO entirely, I don't know if Square Enix is going to do a third MMO anytime soon.
Yeah, so one important thing to remember when it comes to MMO discussions is the genre is not as popular as it once was. When Final Fantasy XIV came out, arguably it was probably the biggest video gaming genre back then. Nowadays, MMOs are in a little bit of a lull, so I'm not really sure if they're going to do a third. If they do, I'm not even sure how they would do it because 14 and 11 are literally on the most opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to like the way they work. So, I don't know. What do you think, BigTymber?
Yeah, I mean, well, I agree with you guys that, yeah, I don't see it happening at any point in the near future. I mean, 14 is still performing really, really well for them. So, just from a business standpoint, I'm not sure if the CBA of doing that would make sense since it's still kicking. But, yeah, if they ever do it, yeah, I would love to see, from a design standpoint, I'd love to see them kind of pick the best pieces from both of their two MMOs, since they have hindsight now and having gone through the development over multiple decades of two MMOs, they've got some learnings from each one, and there's certainly pieces from 11 I'd love to see kind of brought over and copied into a modern MMO type setting. One of those, I think a big attraction for people with 11 that makes it unique is that it's kind of got a horizontal gear progression system, simply because you can swap gear in the middle of combat.
Right. Yeah.
And there's certain gear pieces that boost, different spells and different job abilities that you want to swap into that piece of gear just for the purpose of casting that particular spell, and then you can swap off to a different piece of gear, which means that it's not just 16 pieces of gear that you need to maintain, and it also equates to a situation where we're still using to this day in a lot of best in slot sets. There's certain rings from way back in the day, from 15 years ago, like the defending ring, for example, that some might recognize. That ring is still being used in some best in slots sets today. So it does, I think, add to the reward feeling that you get when you finally get that piece of gear that you're going after. Is it means that gear might be useful for you for multiple years to come, whereas a lot of the modern MMOs today, it's kind of this strict vertical gear progression system where you work hard to get the gear that you wanted from that Savage Raid, and then the next Savage Raid comes out, and then there's new crafted gear, and that instantly makes the gear that you work toward completely useless once that new set comes out.
With your gear, do you have to keep it all in your inventory?
Either inventory, or they have what's referred to as a Mog wardrobe system.
Okay.
Which is basically additional inventory capacity, where you can house all of this extra gear.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say probably 25% of the disappointment with 11 among like the veteran players is just how difficult it is to manage and keep all of the gear with them while they're playing.
It creates a hoarder situation, right? You're like, I just picked up this stick. Maybe I need it. I don't know. Maybe in 20 years, the stick is going to be important. Right.
That's true. And to what BigTymber was saying, I think that is one of the biggest draws of 11. People today still grind for relic weapons, which if you've played 11 at any time in its history, unless, it was right after launch, relic weapons have always been like at the forefront of the game. Now they're arguably the weakest among like the ultimate weapon categories, but there are still really legitimate uses for relics. Some jobs are just inferior if you don't have your relic for it. So, some people still spend time farming these 20-year-old weapons that are still very relevant today. And it's true for all 5 ultimate weapons. They're called the Primo weapons. In 14, people call the ultimate weapons the relic weapons. In 11, the relic weapon is just the first of the Primos. So, you could literally spend even a year grinding out all 5 of those for your job. And, sometimes jobs might be able to utilize different weapon types. So for Dark Knight, you'd be grinding out both the Scythe and the Greatsword because the Dark Knight can use both of those. So, like, any incremental progress that you make in 11's endgame will very likely be relevant for many, many years to come, which is a really, really big draw to the game. When I first started, like, 2 years ago, I started working on ambuscade gear. I had to log out for some school-related reasons, and when I came back, I finished my ambuscade gear. I logged out for another year, and it's just as relevant now as when I first started working on it 2 years ago, So, it's really cool to be playing a game like that.
It's good for players who, you have played the game in the past, but for new players, it still definitely seems intimidating, right?
Yeah, that is the downside of that kind of horizontal progression system. Is when I come back and play 14 every once in a while, when I get the itch, all I have to do is buy the latest set of crafted gear, and I'm ready for the raid, which is a really nice feature of 14. So yeah, there's pros and cons to it, but I guess I'd be interested in seeing if there was a third MMO, to see them maybe bring over this idea of horizontal gear progression into a modern MMO type of setting.
If there's a third MMO, it's going to play completely different and probably be closer to like a Monster Hunter feel than like what we expect in traditional MMOs. Probably action RPG is what I would expect from Square Enix. But then again, they've never had like the best latency solutions for some things, and so it may be difficult for them to do it, but I think that's where I would want to see the direction go, which I don't know if you guys are going to be playing Monster Hunter when it comes out here in just a little bit, but
probably not.
No.
I am excited to see where it takes the series. I've always had my eye on the series, but I don't play too many games outside of 11 and just a handful of others that my siblings might be playing or something like that,
Yeah.
I might dabble, but as Vice mentioned, there is this other master trial that we have to get back into the sweatshop on.
Yeah. That's the problem. I can't give up everything else that would be necessary to be a world racer in 11.
If only there were 30 hours in a day.
You know what most people tell me in the world race scene for 14 is they want to clear it first so they could do other things. Yeah. That's the big reward. Yeah.
I do want to defend 11 a little bit.
Sure.
And some people take really big issue with, I guess, the way they've approached the inaccessibility of gearing in 11. In 11, probably the best weapon in the game for the most circumstances is a weapon called Nagling. It's a relatively easy weapon to get. In fact, you get one free ambuscade weapon when you start the game if you've been playing for a couple months. This weapon will match the vast majority of other weapons just in terms of damage output. Now, on one hand, that's awesome because if you don't play a lot, you can grind for this weapon and you can participate to some degree in as close to endgame activity as possible. It is also a really big bummer. Some people are really irritated because a weapon that's that easy to get is so strong. So I'm not necessarily sure if you'd consider like this Nagling a pro or a con, but it is there for those who want to try dabbling in endgame. If you get one of those, you're probably welcome in some groups, provided you know how, like, the basics of your job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, this has been fun overall, man. It's almost already been 2 hours, and we've been just kind of hanging out and talking, and I've kind of missed doing these shows, and I hope you guys enjoyed being on this show too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it was fun. We certainly appreciate the chance to give 11 a spotlight. It definitely these days doesn't get all that much attention. So, I think just putting it out there, just letting people know that the game's still alive and kicking, and there's a roadmap for 25. There's more content to come, and they're still putting out really challenging fights like this one.
Okay. Well, we'll ask this last question here, just because Mods put it on the screen, so I feel like I'd be a horrible person for not asking it. If you could recommend 11 for only one thing, like you're recommending people to come in and play the game, what is your sell point? What would it be?
Ooh, I think I gave mine away already, which would be the horizontal gear progression system. The staying power of that just feels good. If you spend a lot of time farming one particular piece of gear, you know that come next patch, that piece of gear isn't going to be completely out of date now, and you're just going to end up tossing that piece of gear that you spent hours farming. To me, that just kind of adds to the level of feeling like you're rewarded as you're doing the content.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and for me personally, if you're going to take a gameplay approach, Big, I'm probably going to go with just the story. I mean, if you're interested in Final Fantasy stories, 11's got a ton of really great stories. There are plenty of gameplay reasons, but I think the horizontal gear progression is the best gameplay reason, and the story if you're interested in narrative. So yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, I mean, like, I have talked more about 11 than I have in the last couple of years. So I feel pretty proud about that.
Yeah.
It will never go away. Even 5 years from now, 20 years from now, people are like, when are you going to start up 11? And so it's, it's one of those things where maybe I'm an old man at a retirement home. I'm like, I guess I'll finally give it a try. See how it goes. I'm fairly confident the retirement homes are going to have streamer booths in them as well. When I get there.
And you can start on your relic as soon as you hit that retirement home.
Yeah, it's true.
It's still going to be relevant. That's the cool thing about 11.
Oh, man. All right. Well, wrapping this up and everything, you guys have been a blast again. And I always like to kind of give you guys a little bit of time just to shout out if you want people to find you somewhere where they could find you, or anything like last words you want to say before getting off the air. And I guess I'll start with you, Big, if that's all right.
Yeah. I'm a no social media Andy, so I suppose you can't find me anywhere.
Congrats.
But
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, in some ways it's freeing, but so there's that. But I would just give a shout out to the group that kind of made this possible. There's obviously 5 other members in the party that weren't here to talk about this today, but obviously they kind of had equal contribution to the effort. And who knows, maybe we'll be back at some point for the next master trial.
Yeah. Well, what's the if you don't mind, what are the names of the other members in the group?
There's a picture of it if one of the mods wants to put that up.
The picture with all the names on it? Yeah, if Jet, if you could figure that out.
I'll resend it if you can't find it. You can go ahead, Big T, if you want to.
Yeah, just whatever their names were.
I can list them off. So one is Shiraj, Mopar, Snookums, Baker Boy, and Nefertari.
Okay. There you go. Just that way now people know the world first and world only currently players that have cleared this fight, which is still insane to me. That no one else has even cleared it, even after, kind of confirming a lot of strategy. There we go.
Yeah, there they are.
All right, perfect. All right, and now you can take that off whenever, Jet. I'll let you figure that out. And then Vice, if you want to go.
Yeah, definitely. I have a Twitter account by pretty much the same name, Vicenarian YT, and a YouTube channel with the same name. So if you're interested in 11 content, you can find some more stuff about that there.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And any shout outs or anything else you want to say to the community before getting off?
Pretty much to this group in particular. They've helped me a ton as far as even just finding players who are working on this stuff. They've been a huge help. So, yeah, to all of the people who are just on screen, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. And you too, Big T.
Yeah. I would like to reiterate, too, World Race is like a really cool thing, but being able to watch it, being able to pay attention to it, being able to track anything, it all comes down to the player's choice. Right, and without them, there's nothing. There's no information to analyze. There's no conversation until they come forward and they're willing to actually be a part of the conversation. And now, people who are usually really into getting first are usually hyped to talk about it, but it's their choice. They can do whatever they want. They don't have to. And so there's a huge appreciation to the players and willingness to be able to have these kind of conversations and dive into it. So, Big T, thank you so much for that. It does mean a lot.
Yeah. Thank you for being willing to chat about it. It's been fun.
And
yeah,
Vice,
a lot of fun.
Thanks for bringing this to my attention too. Of course, it was during the holiday season. This kind of came up, and it was really interesting. Something I wanted to jump into, and I wouldn't have known about it unless if you approached me. So I do appreciate it. I mean, as soon as that message came across, I was like, all right, let me put this in front of him and all the other people who play 11. Tell me if this looks like something that's real or just whatever. And they're like, good to go. That's awesome. Please talk about it.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing what you do over there.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for the spotlight. Again, really appreciated.
Yeah, I don't know how much of a spotlight it is. This is all for me. I need people to know this. MogTalk is for me. It's for my own personal interest in conversation, and being able to sit and talk about these things with people who are passionate is just what I love to do. So thanks for sounds horrible. Thanks for satisfying me.
Yeah, definitely. And like say, when Wing of War rolls around, you'll probably get another message. So yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Sounds good. And yeah, for everybody that's watching now, just a reminder that my life has changed completely in the last 6 months in terms of content creation, everything else that I'm doing. The plan is to kind of come back with MogTalk and be a lot more open with topics and not be completely Final Fantasy XIV centric. Even though it's our home, it's not where we have to stay all the time. And so I like to be able to venture out and have other conversations. Final Fantasy XI is an obvious little jump to kind of have a different conversation than 14. But there's a lot more coming down the pipeline that I'm planning. I don't know how often, how frequent. It's going to be more fun than anything else. And so as soon as there's something that catches my interest, I'll be here. As well as streaming, we will probably come back to streaming at least a slow start, maybe once a week or something like that. If you guys want to catch it, I hope you've all enjoyed this change in format. It's just something that's been in my head. I needed to get it out. It's out now. Feel free to give me opinions about it. We have more little advancements and little things that are in my head that I have to get out as well, so look forward to that. And with that all being said, I guess we can all just say bye and see you next time. So you guys both, by the way, while I'm saying bye, have to say bye and wave, even though you're not on camera, Big. It's a requirement. So let's just all say bye, guys. See you next time. Bye.
We'll see you later.
See you guys. I am waving. Absolutely waving.